Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Welcome to the Shaken Podcast. I'm Steve Sunshine. Your confidence, your mood, your perspective, even your faith may be shaken because of something that's happened in your life. Jesus told us we'd have trouble in this world, so we're shaken but not surprised. He also said, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." In this podcast, you'll hear honest conversations with people who have or are going through life-altering hard times and have found that God was with them in the midst of it all.
But I do know God by His nature is kind. I know He's merciful. I know He's one that brings comfort. I know He's one that gives us wisdom. And I know sometimes when it gets really hard, He can give us the strength to stand strong in spite of the challenges. And so I think we do want to put our trust in His nature and His goodness, His kindness. I believe it will help us in every way.
We know that God in His kindness and grace can give you peace and comfort or the strength to persevere. But what about courage? J.D. King went to the Old Testament to find out more about that, and he's here to tell us what he found. He's co-author of the book Mighty Like Gideon.
I wrote this book with Steve Gray, and together we wanted to take the story of Gideon and all the turns and challenges and kind of use it as an opportunity to talk about how God wants to change our lives and how God's with us. And even in the midst of challenge, even when we're under onslaught from the enemy or whatever, God will be there. He'll help us and ultimately position us, I think, to find an answer, to find who we need to be and where we need to go. And so that book's a lot about that, giving people hope and inspiration, maybe getting a fresh sense of how God could really impact their lives.
So maybe it'd be good to summarize the Gideon story.
For sure. The Gideon story shows up primarily in Judges 6 through 8. I think there may be a little bit in chapter 9 too. But what you have happening, of course, is you have Israel under a challenging time. You have these people, the Midianites. They're from other nations outside of Israel. They've come in and they're wrecking all the crops and they're taking everything they have. And the people are like hiding in caves and not really able to live like they should. And this has been going on for a long time. And the people are really frustrated and disappointed and hurting. And so finally, there's this one guy, Gideon, who's down in the wine press and he's threshing out, wheat, just a little wheat to try to feed his family. And all of a sudden, the Lord begins to send an angel to, to call him to maybe rise up in that challenging time. And, the angel says, you're a mighty warrior. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm not anything like that. I'm from the weakest family. I have nothing to offer. I don't know anything. So, the Lord begins to, inspire Gideon to rise up, and he has to kind of get over his own insecurities and his own weaknesses. And bit by bit, he does that. He gets some, leading of the Lord to, go and gather other men, and they go and meet at the river, and God finally begins to change things. But Gideon had to discover who he was and had to get, some confidence in what God was saying, and he had to be willing to kind of rise up from the wine press and actually rise into who he was supposed to be. And so it's an incredible story. There's so many great little episodes and little applications, I think, that could call all of us, even when we're in a difficult season or challenging time, that God is wanting to help us and that God has answers and He will give us, hope in the midst of great challenge.
Yeah, and I hear you talking about, finding out who Gideon is. Gideon also, I think, found out who God is. And
right,
that,
of course.
That who Gideon is somebody that God was willing to use, which I think a lot of us feel like, well, why would God use me? What do I have to offer?
Yeah.
And
sure.
What he ended up offering, I guess, was his trust.
Yeah. Gideon, I think maybe he struggled a little bit initially. I think like all of us do. That's what I love about these Bible stories, Steve. There's a real humanity here. There's this is not just a lesson or an allegory. This is a real person in history who, had to wrestle through some things and discover, how to rise up. And, it's not an easy thing. Like, I think, for example, he gets the impression from the Lord, like, hey, you need to go and get rid of these, these wrong altars, these, the worshiping the wrong gods. You need to kind of get that out of here, and like Gideon's like, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm nervous. So he kind of had to do that under the cover of darkness. He was a little nervous, a little chicken, but he did it. And I think there's these lessons like sometimes we need to do it scared. We need to do it with maybe a measure of anxiety. Like, okay, you know what? We're going to move forward. We're going to take a step. We're going to begin to believe for something good and expect something good. And I think there's a lot of great lessons in that. I mean, the conditions for us is not always ideal. Sometimes there's a lot of going against us. Maybe the whole armies of Midian are up against us, and how are we going to get out of this mess? And maybe there isn't easy answers, but I can assure you that somebody needs to rise up in this time and have some hope. Somebody needs to call people to action. If nothing else, we need to call ourselves, say, you know what, I'm going to get with God. I'm going to let God inspire me. I'm going to believe for something greater.
I heard somebody say, and I don't know who gets credit for this quote originally, but that courage is fear that said its prayers.
Right. Yeah. Well, brave people, a lot of brave people, if they were honest, they said, hey, this was not easy. Maybe this was challenging. And, I get it. There can be insecurities. I tell one little story here. My wife and I wanted to have a child. We talk about this in the Mighty Like Gideon book. And, the doctors told us that we would have, we would basically never have a child. My wife had a severe case of what's called endometriosis. And it's like where, the fallopian tubes closed off. But, we didn't give up. We kept praying. It took a while. But, God actually, intervened in a powerful way. And, we ended up having a baby, a little while after that. And I know there's not always a miracle. There's not always a breakthrough. I'm not here trying to say that everything will always work out perfectly. But I can tell you that we do need to continue to have hope in God. God is powerful. He's mighty. Even if we don't see everything we want, He will give us strength. He will give us comfort. He will give us wisdom. He will enable us to rise up and become more, of what He's called us to be. And I believe that's true of all of us.
We've talked so much on this show in the past about God, walking through hard times with us. We've talked a little bit about God removing the hard times or coming in and doing something miraculous. Not as much. But maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because I don't want to leave that on the table. That's never been the intention.
Yeah. Well, I hear you. I mean, my point I'm trying to get here is if we don't see everything ideal, I don't want anybody to be discouraged. I know not everything's always a fairy tale and everything's always perfect. But I do know God is powerful. I do know that Jesus, His shed blood can affect all of our lives. I've seen the Lord do a lot of powerful things and touch lives, and I've seen miracles happen, by His hand. And, and I think we need to have hope in that, hope in the reality, and of course I always love the attitude like the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel, they said, hey, you know what, we're going to stand and believe, that God will deliver us from the fiery furnace, but even if He doesn't, we're going to stand anyway. And it's like, I think there's something to be said about that. We stand for God, His strength, His life, His goodness. In the Old Testament, God reveals His name. At one point, I believe Exodus 15:26, He says, my name is Yahweh Rapha, or my name is a healer, and that's part of His nature. And I mean, and so we should, ask or believe that God's nature could show up in powerful ways, and grace is there. And even if nothing else, He gives us grace to walk through things and to stand strong. But I could do a whole podcast with you. I've probably seen, God heal people, thousands of times over the last 20 years, just different things. And, again, I'm not trying to say everybody always gets healed. I'm not saying that this is like some kind of magical incantation or something like that. I mean, it's God's grace. It's His mercy. Sometimes, I don't understand why sometimes there's a breakthrough over here and not over here. And I don't have the wisdom to explain all of that. But I do know God by His nature is kind. I know He's merciful. I know He's one that brings comfort. I know He's one that gives us wisdom. And I know sometimes when it gets really hard, He can give us the strength to stand strong in spite of the challenges. And so I think we do want to put our trust in His nature and His goodness, His kindness. I believe it will help us in every way.
So the challenge that a person who's going through a trial or has an illness or somebody close to them does, or whatever the problem might be, is to hold in tension the idea that God may not heal you in this life, but he won't leave you alone either. But He does heal sometimes. How would you advise somebody to walk in that tension? I think that's hard.
Well, I don't have all the wisdom. I think that, for example, when I read the Bible, the book of James, it says, if there's any sick among you, James chapter 5, he says, there's any sick among you, call for the elders, pray for the sick. And in a nutshell, just summarizing the passage, I believe it says if there's sickness, if there's a challenge, if we're dealing with something, the right answer is prayer. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the right posture. It doesn't say, pray if this condition is met or that condition. No, the right answer is prayer. And obviously, God himself is going to have to be the one to do the work. God himself is going to have to be the one to bring the healing. I mean, we can't manufacture, we can't strive into it. Healing is not a reward. Healing is a gift.
Yes.
You don't earn a healing. You don't, all of that. It's just a gift. But I do think the right answer to any need we have is prayer. Real prayer, and prayer, is not always just petitioning. It's just, sometimes it's crying out to God. It's, Lord, I trust your nature. I mean, blind Bartimaeus in the Gospels, he says, Son of David, have mercy on me. I mean, that's a great prayer. Lord, you're the Son of David. You're the Messiah. You're the promised one of all that times. And just show your mercy, show your nature, show who you are in my body, in my life. What a great prayer to pray. I mean, and I think anybody can pray that, no matter how bad your situation is, no matter how tough it is, because I'm really convinced that he is the marvelous one. He's the kind one, that he is good. I really believe that. And I just want to be around that nature, that all of who he is. That's faith kind of pulls on that. And even if I don't prevail or whatever in the fight, I mean, it's still enriching and empowering and a blessing to lean into that. But Steve, I'm telling you here, I mean, I get it. And I want to reiterate, I know not everybody always gets healed, but I've seen a lot of people get help over the years. Even if nothing else, I've seen pain lessen. I've seen, greater mobility. I've seen people that should have died in 1 year die like a decade later. I mean, I've seen all these things, and my own experience has been trusting in the Lord and just, having hope for something magnificent is never wrong. We should always keep doing that. I don't believe that we should give up the fight, until the very end. I mean, you can give up when it's over with, but until then, we should keep fighting and believing in his nature and his character. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I was just thinking that when you pray, there are two good things that could happen, and maybe it's some combination of both. I mean, the most obvious good thing is you could be healed, or the relationship might get fixed, or whatever it is you're praying for might actually happen, because God, there are stories like that. But on the other hand, even if it doesn't, Philippians 4 says when you pray and you lay your needs before God and you do so thankfully, that you get peace, the peace that passes understanding, and it guards your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, seeking God, trying to draw near to him, asking for his comfort, for his favor, for his blessing is always a right response. And, maybe we don't see everything we would like. Maybe we don't see a full breakthrough. But I can assure you in my own experience, there's always a benefit. You're always enriched when you seek God like that. I mean, if nothing else, just your mind, your heart, your emotions, you grow in that. And I mean, Gideon, had to seek God and find these things, and God positioned. I mean, the idea of Gideon and these guys with very little resources actually defeating the Midianites, had all these camels, and I mean, in the natural, that was an impossibility, and then they go and beat them with like jars and torches and, ram's horn,
that they're musical instruments.
They beat him with music and flashlights. I mean, to use the modern vernacular and all that, like none of that makes sense. And I mean, I know maybe not everybody has the same belief in the Bible, as I do, but I would like everybody, I believe these stories are real and there's lessons here.
Right.
And I get, not everything always works out, but at the same time, the Bible gives us examples of God doing incredible things in improbable situations. And I believe we need to regain hope that there is hope for us, that there is a possibility things could turn, that God is good, and He gives us wisdom, He gives us help, and He doesn't leave us defenseless. He comes alongside us.
The creator of the laws of physics can break the laws of physics.
He sure can. He sure
a
can.
revelation for my dad, who came to Christ about a year and a half ago, in his 80s. He's a big science guy, and he eventually realized that. I'm curious about Mighty Like Gideon. What made you decide to write this particular book?
Well, I co-wrote this book with Steve Gray. He and I were involved with a revival movement that broke open in the 90s. And when I say a revival, it was just a stirring, fresh stirring of God, and a congregation in rural Missouri, and 250,000 people came to a town of 532 people, and they came to just pray and seek God and all of that. And so we had a lot of stories and experiences that people were kind of asking us to write about, and he did a sermon in that revival called The River Test that was about Gideon, and it was just kind of an inspiring story about how, what's going to happen to you when you come near the river. How are you going to drink? In the Gideon story, the men, some drank a certain way, some drank another way, and so the question is, how do you respond when you're on the edge of something God is doing? What's your how thirsty are you? How hungry are you? And so we used that story in that episode, and then we wanted to add the other episodes from Gideon's life as just a way to start talking about life lessons and our own experiences and stories of inspiration, and empowerment that the Gideon story gives us an occasion to leap off of into. And so we have 19 chapters in there. I wrote half of the chapters. He wrote the other half. And there's all these moments, like, one of the chapters is called, God meets you in the wine press, and that's, I've already been alluding to that. Gideon, when he's, the wine press was kind of a low place, kind of, out of sight, where they would crush the grapes to make the wine and all that. And he's down there actually having to thresh out the wheat in this low place, and not the place you want to be. Usually they would thresh the wheat up on the mountain where the wind could blow all the chaff and the things you didn't want. And so it's kind of representative of sometimes you're in the low place, you're fighting for survival, you can't make it. And the thing is, he's down there, but all of a sudden, way down here in this wine press, an angel shows up and begins to speak about his destiny. He calls him mighty warrior, and like, well, what do you mean mighty warrior? Like, I'm not a mighty warrior. I'm out here just trying to, make a little bit of bread for something to eat for my family. And so God meets us in the wine press. And I think that's really relevant to your audience, Steve, here, because I think most of us here could say, hey, you know what? I'm in the wine press. Like, I'm down in the low spot. And like, it feels like the enemy's hovering over me, and I don't know how I'm going to survive. But the thing is this, we're not alone in the wine press. We're not alone in those moments that God can actually call us out of the wine press into our destiny. I really believe that.
And the Bible is full of God choosing kind of ordinary people.
Right.
It's interesting because if you look at the Apostle Paul, you can see why you'd want somebody with the mind to understand technicalities to write Romans, because Romans is a very complex book. But on the other hand, maybe more frequently you see Mary, or you see Moses, who said, "I'm not a speaker. You get somebody to, you can't have the right guy." Sure. I think that should be both a wake up and an encouragement to any of us, because
I agree.
No matter how ordinary you think you are, you could get chosen to do anything.
That's exactly right. God usually calls out the ordinary people, and it's interesting, that what's more important is not how much ability you have, or wisdom, or skill, or whatever, how much strength or health you even have. That's not a prerequisite. What's important is your response, which is kind of the key idea of the book. It's not just that you drink; it's how you drink. In front of the river. How do you respond to God? There are people with everything going for them, and they don't respond positively at all. They just kind of don't put any effort or any heart. They don't. They've had everything easy in life, and they just don't have anything good to say or respond to. But there's other people that may have had everything gone against them, and everything's wrong. But you know what? They have a different response. They say, "Okay, God, I'm going to get up. I'm going to try. I'm going to speak. I'm going to share. I'm going to make myself available. I'm going to, believe for something better. And I'm telling you, no matter where you're at or how messed up things there can be, I think your response really makes a difference. And Gideon, even though maybe he didn't respond always perfectly right initially, he started learning how to respond. At first he's kind of like, the story and the angel shows up to him and calls him a mighty warrior, and he kind of laughs at that, like, what are you talking about? And he didn't even know that an angel was there. Like sometimes we don't even see when God's in the middle of something, like we don't notice it because we're so caught up in our problem. And but sure enough, God had sent an angel there calling him out, and so he had to change his attitude. Then he was a little nervous, like, okay, should I really do this? And he put out the fleece. Everybody knows the story about Gideon and the fleece. He kind of lays this piece of wool out on the ground, and is it going to be wet in the morning, or dry in the morning? He does it 2 different times. Like he was still a little hesitant, a little nervous. Like, can I really do this? Can I really respond? Can I really move forward? I mean, remember, I'm weak. I'm not. I don't have everything going for me. But the Lord was willing to work with him. I mean, I think God's like, okay, if you need this sign, I'll give you a sign. I'll make the fleece wet. I'll put make that wool. I'll give you a picture that can help you know I am in the middle of this. I'm calling you to something greater. And sure enough, he did. And then like I said, I told earlier, the Lord tells him, hey, you need to tear down these false altars to false gods. Well, that's tough. Now he's got to deal with family background and family issues. His dad's, altar. I mean, I think we were all dealing with dad's religion. But I mean, so he kept responding and kept responding stronger as time went on. And I think that God will do that for us, that when we start responding, we can respond stronger and see even more.
Yeah, this is not a one-off. I mean, I'm thinking about, like Gideon, if you feel like in your life you've blown it in terms of how you've responded to God,
right?
That's not a deal breaker. Look at, Thomas needed proof. Peter got out of the boat, which I actually think was quite courageous, and then took his eye off of Jesus and needed to be rescued. Right. But I give him props for getting out of the boat. And then he ended up denying Jesus and was restored at the end of John, which is one of the most beautiful passages, I think, in all of Scripture. Right. You haven't disqualified yourself. I think a lot of people feel that way because of either a lifestyle or whatever that they've had in the past, or they've been given an opportunity and they feel like they've blown it. You're not disqualified.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Gideon story, I've already alluded to this, but if you read through Judges 6, here he is, threshing out that wheat in the wine press, and the angel shows up, and this angel is saying all this stuff, and Gideon actually has a pretty rotten attitude if you read that part of the story. And the Gideon, this angel, he doesn't know it's an angel is part of the problem, and the angel's saying these things, and Gideon responds back, well, where's God? Where's the miracles? Where's the healing breakthroughs? That if God's forgotten us. I mean, that's not a kind of thing you'd expect a hero to say. I mean, in a way, he wasn't a hero yet. And I mean, like you're saying, Steve, that maybe we have made wrong choices. Maybe we have had the wrong attitude. Maybe we've let our sickness or our pain, get the better of us. But we can change that right now. So you know what? In spite of my circumstances, in spite of my weakness, in spite of what I don't have in my hands, I'm going to turn my attention to God and to hope and to the possibility and the things that God is asking me to do or maybe positioning me to do. I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to take one. I don't have to know all the steps, but I'm going to actually get a sense of what the next step is. I'm going to take one step today. I'm going to try one thing today and respond with hope in belief and see what God will do.
Yeah, and that could be anything. And at the very least, he's going to draw you closer to him.
Absolutely.
You step toward him, he's definitely stepping toward you. So
absolutely.
What if you could boil down what you'd like people to get from reading Mighty Like Gideon, what would that be?
Well, fundamentally, the book is about stepping into your identity, as people who God's called to be impactful, to change the world, and And Gideon became that, obviously, maybe, not all at once, but, through his responses. And so, my hope is no matter who you are, no matter, what weaknesses you have, no matter your education, your health status, whatever it might be, I believe all of us are called, to be filled with the goodness of Jesus, to be filled with life, and to make impact in this world. And I believe every person alive is called to that. And you know what? I mean, there's a lot of things going against us: circumstances, environments, sicknesses, economics. You can go down a list, all these different problems. And I would never want to make light of what people are going through, these challenges and trouble. But the point is, though, in spite of our circumstances, in spite of what, to use the Gideon analogy, in spite of the fact that we're under attack by the Midianites, and it's not easy. It's not easy to eat. It's not easy to prevail. In spite of all that, I do believe there is hope. There is a possibility. I believe we're living in a day where God is calling warriors. Here we are on the edge of the river, and how are you going to respond to this river? How are you going to drink? And the story, Steve. I think Gideon originally had 10,000 people. In the end, he only used 300. Only 300 drank a certain way that were really thirsty, and so the Lord absolutely transformed the history of Israel from 300 guys that didn't even hardly know what they were doing, but all they knew was they were thirsty and they really wanted to drink. And so, I don't know, that your listeners, other people, like, how thirsty are you? How much are you willing to lean into God? And it's easy to get caught up in the problems or the circumstances or what the Midianites are doing to us, or the fact that we don't have enough food or we don't have enough of this or that. And those are true realities. But we can't let our circumstances, we can't let our external fight change what's going on inside us. So this book's about getting back to that something greater, that hope, that strength, that life, that confidence that Jesus himself has birthed something wonderful in this era, and that we are called in some sense to be the image bearers, to reflect who he is in the earth, and to be something like Gideon. I mean, we want to be mighty like Gideon. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'm sick or I'm struggling, I want to get mighty. I mean, I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying that there's simple answers, but on whatever level that means for me, I want to find out how to get mighty, how to get strong, how to not be just a victim of circumstances, but I can rise up and step into a higher level with God and the things he's called me to.
Yeah, there's both comfort and challenge in that, and I think that's appropriate. And if you're in a situation where this is the dark night and you're just laid flat out by whatever has happened, know that you have time. This is not something you have to pop up and maybe what you need right now is just a friend and somebody to listen and obviously prayer. But as you gain a little bit of strength, I think it's good news that God has something for you to do as as his child is, and for his kingdom. I don't know what that is. It may or may not be something big, but the little things are big. In fact, we don't even know what's big. We're not going to find that out till heaven. And I don't think it's exactly a cliche, but it is a song title. So God's not through with you. He's not done with you.
Right. Yeah, Steve, you're 100% right. Everyone listening to this has something they can do for God, something important, something significant. They could look like, a lot of different things. I don't want to put anybody in any one role. But even if you're sick, you're laying in a bed, you can't do much, there's something you can do. You could pray for somebody. You could do something. You could send a short text to somebody, giving them some encouragement and hope. I mean, there are purposes and callings that we all have, no matter what we're fighting against, that every human being has something they can give to change the world and impact the lives of others in spite of our circumstances. And more importantly, I think that the Lord wants to just do a great work and stir our faith. I mean, I get it. I know probably most everyone listening to this, obviously have trust in Jesus, but I want to just see even more impassioned faith and just hope. And, Jesus is really good. He's really kind, and just getting a fresh vision of his nature, of who he is. And I'm telling you, if nothing alone on this earth, we can worship Jesus. And, if nothing else, just if we're laying in a bed or we're struggling or we've got this or that going on, we can give glory to Jesus, give honor to his name, and to reflect that in the earth here. That's worthwhile, if nothing else. I mean, but we can position ourselves to give him the regard that he deserves. And so, I mean, there's so much to that, and I don't believe that we're victims. I mean, I'm not trying to make light of the pain or the problems, but we're not victims. We are victors, and God has made something significant in us. And we are not our illness, and we are not, our limits or our obstacles. We are something much greater than that.
Well said. JD, thank you so much. I appreciate it. How can people get a hold of your book, Mighty Like Gideon?
You could go on to, there's a landing page called MightyLikeGideon.com. Again, MightyLikeGideon.com. You can order the book there at that site, and you can see some more information about it. And you could sign up a little form there and get some free downloads on it. But cool. If you order it through me and not through Amazon, you actually get you can get the book and a workbook that goes along with it for only $1 more. I believe this is a book of inspiration and hope.
Yeah, well, it sure sounds like it. And we're going to put that link rather than a general link like we normally would, the MightyLikeGideon.com link on our show notes. If you missed it because you're driving or whatever, you can find it there and pick up the book. JD, thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you for listening to Shaken. If you know someone who's asking questions like, why did God allow this to happen? Is God angry at me? What do I make of my suffering? Would you please share Shaken with them? You can help more people find Shaken by liking and subscribing and reviewing this podcast. You can find more episodes at purposely.com or wherever you get podcasts.